to play basketball in an environment that makes them feel comfortable and can give them the opportunity. It kind of coincides with the theme of pride, with inclusion and diversity. So what has been your experience like coaching with the Hoop Queens League here in Toronto?
Oh, it's been really phenomenal. I was surprised that they even asked me to coach, that I was even really on their radar. But to be involved in something like that for women in the city of Toronto is phenomenal. And we know that when we invest in women's sports, it can only grow and it can only get better. So Kessa is doing a great job in getting it started, and to be the first paid pro league to happen in Toronto is an amazing thing to be a part of.
I know that this may or may not require an essay answer, but in terms of representation, that coincides with Pride, Indigenous history, with there being not as many female coaches who are coaching women's teams, what does it mean for you to be able to be a leader and a head coach of a women's collegiate team here in Toronto?
There was one very important coach that I had throughout sort of my developmental years in high school, and she was a black female coach who sort of took me under her wing and kind of got me going. So for me, I was sort of lucky enough to have that one-off, but there's so many other players who don't see themselves, who don't know that that's what they can do. Representation matters, and we know this. We've known this for quite some time. And so to be that representation for other young black players it's something that I don't take for granted. It's something that I work very hard to make sure that the word gets out there, and all of those pieces that we can do that. So I think it can only get better from here.
She worked with Michelle Sung in a province where of the 3 teams in women's youth sports, 2 of them, and even still after Tanya going to Dalhousie, still 2 of the 3 are female coaches. So what can you say about the importance of your relationship with Coach Sung and the impact that it has had on not only you, but also knowing that there's a bigger impact on the province of Manitoba with female coaching?
That experience with Coach Sung is something that is super special for a few reasons. Both of us had children literally 7 weeks apart, and to be able to watch her coach while breastfeeding, while traveling with the baby, was like, hey, I can still coach with a young child. I can still do those things. And to this day, our relationship is still really, really special. I go back to Winnipeg, and when she comes, we see each other. So the impact that she's had on me and my coaching is going to be forever. There's not going to be anything more special from Manitoba specifically. The impact that we've had on Winnipeg maybe is a little bit more, because we have one person committing from Winnipeg who's now coming to Centennial. So maybe that impact is getting there, and we're going to see some trans provincial players come because of my experience in Winnipeg. But again, Coach Sung, I can't say enough about my experience with her on and off the court.
As just mentioned previously before we started recording, Tamara Tatum is the head coach of the University of Toronto Varsity Blues for the women's team. What does it mean for you to see someone like her, a black female, being a head coach of a youth sports team?
I mean, I don't know if that's the pinnacle of her career for her, but even the things she did for our national team, and being, one of a few black players on that national team to now be the first black female coach at U of T, that only says to me that I can do it, right? And only says to younger players that they can do it as well. Again, I can't say it enough, representation matters. And if we're going to be able to, if we want players to see themselves in places that they can be, then for her to be the first black coach at U of T, female black coach, that's fantastic.
When it comes to playing basketball, we know that there are always issues that are bigger than the sports that we play and that it can be used as a platform. It's been seen in the WNBA with being a progressive league to talk about social issues, and that trickles down to lower levels of basketball, especially in Canada. How do you as a coach and as a person in a position of power work with your team to be an ally to those who are representative, who are a part of the LGBT community or Indigenous, or maybe a part of a community that may not necessarily feel safe off the hop when they're in a public space, like being on a team or they're in the eyes of the public?
I think this year we were already that team. We have some queer players on our team, and to be able to ensure that our team accepts them, I think that's the first start that we can have, and I think we already did that. We did that this year with open arms. Even while traveling, everybody was supported, and really doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, can you put the basketball in the hoop for me? So those are the things that are important, whether you check a box or don't check a box, that as long as you feel as though you belong, if you feel that you can fit in, if you feel that you can belong, and the onus is on us to make sure that that happens. And I think our players did that this year with open arms. And it was really good to see, especially with some of the trans rules that had changed this year. We were able to open our doors a little wider for everybody to come and play. So it's a good start.
When it comes to representation with pride and inclusion and diversity, obviously it's something that has only started to make a lot more progress in the last, let's say, decade or so, even though it's been an issue for a lot longer than that. Where do you think people in our community can go next from here to continue to make progress towards being more accepting of others when it comes to participation in sport and representation on a national and or international level?
I think it has to start with acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that there's, specifically for Indigenous Month, acknowledgement that there was a wrong and there was genocide, there was all those things. Once we can make that acknowledgement, then the onus is on you to learn and do the work so that together with those allies and those individuals who need to be represented can do a better job together.
What has been your personal experience with pride in sport as a player and or as a coach?
I don't know that I was ever aware of a queer female black coach ever in my entire career. I've had female white queer coaches, but I don't know that I've ever been able to identify with, hey, that coach is queer, black, and female. So for me, you know, and all of the cultural pieces that come specifically for me, that's a tough question, because I've never had that representation, and I've never had that ability to see myself for who I am in a coaching role. So for me, being in this coaching role, I can now say, hey, you can do it. I am now that representation. And I think if I can start there and not take that for granted, it only opens up more doors, not only for players to come and play who identify, but black players, Indigenous players, all who can just come and play basketball because that's what they want to do.
Mentioning a little bit of this before recording, you know, and even just tying in with what you're saying, being the first person to give that representation to others, who is someone that inspired you when you were younger as a player, and or also even during your time as a coach?
I think the first time that I saw it was when I was a coach. I mean, there's probably a plethora of times as a player that my coaches did it and it just wasn't recognizable to me at the time. But the first time that I could recognize it, I was coaching a Toronto triple threat team, and we went to OBAs in Kitchener-Waterloo. And Coach Keane, at the time, I forget the team he was coaching, but he actually had pulled his team from OBAs on court, allowed the game to play without his team actually playing because of the racism that was happening on court. And I was able to touch base with him really recently, and he's like, yeah, because we have to all play by the same rules. The rules can't be different for us, and the rules be different for them. And that, for me, spoke loudly in that moment in time, because we've dealt with racism from referees. We've dealt with racism from other teams and coaches. So to be able to see another coach deal with it in that way that hit that whole gym differently, for me was the start of, yeah, this is something that we need to do. This is something that we need to get better at. And this is something that we need to do collectively to learn how we can systematically stop racism.
Where do you still see challenges today in sports when it comes to pride and inclusion and diversity, or just within the greater league as a whole?
I think that the changes need to be with those who don't identify as queer, Black, or Indigenous, right? Because we're already the ones who accept, for the most part, who we are. It's now, can we be accepted from others and those who control the gates at the end of the day? Again, they need to do the work. They need to acknowledge the harm. They need to do their research and read about what they can do to make it a better space for us to be inclusive, or for us to be included.
Especially within the province of Manitoba, there's a deep history of Indigenous peoples, many diverse groups, especially within the city of Winnipeg, and University of Manitoba, I think, has taken as much of a lead as they can on ensuring the acknowledgement of the wrongs of the past. What was your experience like at Manitoba in terms of connecting with the Indigenous community, and how it translates to what you do now to impact your team and your community at Centennial College?
Well, when I first moved to Winnipeg, I had no idea that it was the largest Indigenous urban place in North America. I had no clue. So that was, oh, wow, right? Like it was this, oh, okay. Because again, my markers for that in Toronto, as you know, are quite small, right? They're not visibly sort of as they are in Winnipeg, right? We just don't see a lot of them, and what sort of we are shown of Indigenous people are negative representations. So to see Manitoba is light years ahead in comparison to Ontario in terms of acknowledging the wrongs of hurting Indigenous individuals and society as a whole. I think understanding some of the things that they did, I've brought some of that back a little bit in terms of best practice and coaching and some of those pieces. But again, we don't do an Indigenous course in our coaching certification. Only this year has an anti-Black course been added to our coaching certification, right? So there's so much more that we could be doing, and it's slowly happening. It's slowly being built and is positive. I can only do what I know and how I know to do it, and that's to be open arms at all times. Again, to me, it doesn't matter who you love, how you love them. Can you play basketball and do those things at the same time? Then you're welcome to come and play at Centennial, right? So for me, it's part of my everyday. Whether I experience a negative piece, that doesn't transcend negative to a player, right? So, and that's part of who I identify as and how I treat our players on our team. Openness, love, kindness, right? We all need it, and we get it.
When you think about the environment that was fostered with the Bisons and the environment that you're fostering at Centennial, what are some of the similarities and some of the differences that you notice in terms of things that you took from there and that things you want to implement on your own now that you're the head coach?
Mm-hmm. You know, Coach Sung did a great job at being a really good ally, and she took the steps necessary to make sure that players on her team understood what systematic racism looked like. The difference is I am a female Black coach that I don't need to take those steps to do that, right? So the fact that she felt confident enough to do that, for me, taught me as a coach, do those things, right? Stay on the right side of history for whatever reason and take the risk. Because if your players don't see you taking the risk, how do they know that it's okay? Do you know what I mean? So I think that's one of the things that she taught me, was to take that risk, allow your players to see that risk, and allow them to see your vulnerability. And if they can see your vulnerability, then they're going to trust you a little bit more. Then they're going to come to you a little bit more. And that is the environment that we want player to coach.
How does your role as a mom influence your role as a head coach?
Well, this is our youngest child. And I think if you choose to have children someday and you go down that road, you will learn that they teach you so much about yourself through them. And being a mom, I don't know, the impacts it's had just on me coaching. Some people will say it's made me soft, actually. Some people would say I'm not as strict as I used to be. I'm not as, tough. And I was like, well, maybe I'm learning to do things a little bit different. Children on a whole impact you in so many different ways. You just see the world differently a little bit, and whether that's good or bad, I don't know yet, but you definitely have a change of, maybe I'll give you the benefit of the doubt this time, right? And you understand that players need a little bit more love, need a little bit more, and we try to give that little bit more.